Welcome back to a Boxscore Geeks podcast. You may notice there was not a podcast last week. That was because Arturo and I were recovering from Sloan. Although, Arturo, you did give a great podcast over at Real GM. You were headlined by Ian Levy of Hickory High. So if you want to listen even more about that, we'll have that link up. But we've recouped, we've refreshed. We're here to talk about Sloan. We got a ton to go over. I realize that we may sound a little critical of Sloan, so we're going to start off with the good. So, Arturo, I'm just going to throw this out there. What was your favorite part about Sloan this year?
Well, as always, I think the best part of Sloan is actually walking the room, and I think meeting people who I interact with on Twitter or through kind of the internet, and just basically pressing the flesh, getting to meet those people, getting to meet the GMs, getting to meet the folks who actually work for the teams, getting to meet the beat reporters, getting to talk to the beat reporters. Again, I live on an island. I don't get to go to many games, so having the opportunity to talk to these folks and get confirmation of some of the things you think is really good. And again, it actually, to me, it helps my writing because it gives me insight into what's going on. And again, it's really interesting to see what teams are thinking, and it's always interesting to see what teams kind of read or are in a similar wavelength to us. And I think I always say this kind of hint. There are teams who are like walking. There are different schools of thought, and there are teams who are thinking down the same path. And it's kind of interesting to talk to them and get ideas. And again, it's also you get a chance to talk to people like Dean Oliver and meet people like Bill James, who we were kind of poor Dre couldn't even take a photo of Bill James. He was so nervous. So it's like,
yeah,
I think the photo with George Karl is the best.
I don't know if I've deleted it, but there's like a video of me going like, I can't figure out the button. We got this very brief window to get a picture of Arturo next to Bill James. That is up at the Boxscore Geeks, and I got performance anxiety taking that photo.
I think sitting next to Dre while George Karl is making a point about playing his best players when he's talking about Andre Miller is
this is your favorite part of Sloan. I just want to point out, you're like, we're going to bash Sloan and like bad thinking later, and you're like, my favorite part was when George Karl said, I played Ray Felton and Ty Lawson together because you got to play the best players on the court at the same time.
And pretty much every word out of Brian Colangelo's mouth were just hilarious. I mean, Brian Colangelo was just and he was unintentionally hilarious. So it was great. I mean, again, it's an industry conference. We call it a wonk conference. So there's sharps in the room. There are guys like who are smart about this, and you get to talk to people, you get to share ideas, and it's a good kind of place to come and have that experience. I mean, I think I recommend it highly. Again, you have to be of a certain mindset, and again, this hasn't gone up yet, but there's always something you see at the conference which kind of tells you what the future is going to be like. I think last year it was the CBA panel, which was really interesting about what's going to happen in the next contract negotiation. Like, the players are walking, guys, and they're going to walk, and there's some very specific reasons why they're going to walk. It's because the money's going to go up. But it was really interesting to have it be hashed out on there. I think the other conference was like meeting Kobe's German doctor, which kind of put us on this whole kind of PED thing, which we've talked about. And then, I say it's really interesting that there's going to be a change, and like a team like the Nets all of a sudden is going to get much better once the drug testing is kind of over for the NBA for the season.
Well, that's definitely interesting. And by the way, Brian just gave me a note. I apologize to new listeners. So Arturo and I are going to talk all things Sloan this podcast. So obviously we're talking what we like. Arturo apparently gets bizarre joy out of things I don't enjoy at Sloan. So if you're a twisted person, Arturo. After that, we're going to talk about the academic nature of Sloan for sure. We have a lot to say on that. And then finally, we're going to wrap up talking kind of the disparate world of sports versus reality, because Arturo and I are both professionals in the real world, where a lot of what we see at Sloan, a lot of what Brian Colangelo talks about, is not what we see. But anyway, anyway, so on that note, I liked what you had to say about what you liked about Sloan. From my perspective, and of course, this is the second time I got to meet him this year. I'm mad impressed. I got to meet Malcolm Gladwell again. He's one of my heroes. We got a great piece of advice. Do you recall her full name? I believe it's Rachel.
Yeah, Rachel Lauren.
Rachel Lauren. Yeah. So a great piece of advice if you're going to a conference and you want to get a photo with someone famous there. ask for a group shot with a group of people, even if, you've just met them. We just realized we knew each other on Twitter. That makes it really easy because if you're trying to get one-on-ones, the person runs out of time and runs off. So if you ask for a group shot with 4 or 5 of you, then you get the photo, and all you have to do is crop out the strangers if you don't like them, or keep them in if we're all friends. So
yeah, she was great. She needs like a blog on Lifehacker. She had a bunch of really good suggestions about how to get some advantages in these different things.
And I was going to say, I don't actually even want to mention all of them because I don't want I don't want them to get closed off if anybody.
Don't mention loopholes. They get closed off.
But anyway, so I enjoyed the celebrities. I was actually really mad at Sloan, so I guess we're just going to say what we didn't like. Is they scheduled Malcolm Gladwell talking to Dave Epstein, who is the author of The Sports Gene. These are 2 big football players in the field of literature, right? Both Malcolm Gladwell and Dave Epstein have written a lot about football, right across from Brian Burke talking the NFL. And from a scheduling perspective, that was just rough in my perspective because I wanted to see both of those talks.
Yeah,
and I just couldn't believe Sloan scheduled them right across from each otother.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but I do think there were some scheduling opportunities, particularly on the second day. I think, and we were there. The last panel wasn't great. That by the end, and there were some panels that were wasted in the second room and things were going on at the same time, which they had some really, as you said, they had Brian Burke in the main room. They had Gladwell and Epstein in the second room, which was great. They had the media panel, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which was really good. And so, I think they could have done a better job at kind of getting some of these big panels kind of, a little more spread out so they weren't taking place at the same time. I think having them not be online or having them be online at was it $40? I understand the profit incentive, but I do think they could have a lower price point so people actually see some of these. I think the Adam Silver interview by Gladwell is brilliant, and I recommend it. And really, I said it at the time. Basically, Gladwell asked every question like Dave Barry would have asked of Silver in terms of he's big into the whole economics thing, and he asked some very pointed questions about everything that's going on. Again, that's going up tomorrow. I'm talking a little about that, but about corporate tax breaks for the owners, about PEDs, about basically paying college athletes and what he thinks about that. There were some really tough questions. I think another thing that was really surprising to me was it was the first time I ever saw that the leagues were talking about gambling in a positive way.
Let's be careful. League. This was for what we're going to talk about, the NBA in particular, because that's our background and reality in the field. But yeah, Adam Silver basically mentioned positively that gambling helps the field. Understand that as recently as the last year, the NFL came out against and I'm already dropping the name. I didn't see the movie. It was with Jennifer Lawrence. It was a dancing movie.
Silver Linings Playbook, yes.
Thank you. The Silver Linings Playbook. The NFL came out against it and said they didn't like how the movie portrayed gambling on the NFL. And I've heard a few other podcasts, not even sports podcasts, it's like comedy podcasts. They're like, did the NFL, after they said that, they were like, we didn't appreciate how this movie condoned gambling on the NFL, and then winked at the camera because that's the NFL has to realize that it's because of gamblers that they're the most popular sport in the United States.
There's a reason. I understand. They understand it. I think, but the tone of it, that basically Silver took a tone to it that was completely different from it. David Stern would have never ever said the words that he said. So I think it's a very different kind of mindset, I believe. And I think it's going to lead to some interesting things. I think they understand what drives the dollars, and I think that's actually going to be the key. It's how do you turn that interest into money is, I think, where the next sea change is coming.
And that'll be interesting. I was going to say, are there I find that we're just very critical people by nature because even the great stuff, just so much to geek out on. How many? I think we got pictures with another 4 or 5 GMs this year, which was awesome. We got Hinkie, Cho. We can never get Mike Zarin to take a photo, so we got photos with. Of course got Maury again. He got the Maury Ball shirt, which by the way I am wearing. This was designed by Jeremy Britton, but it says Maury Ball, which. Of course, if you can go for a pun, you go for the pun. That was amazing. You got to meet Bill James, which was awesome. And you told him about your dad, right? If I seem to recall, or my mistake.
Yeah, basically, it's my dad kept the book in the bathroom. That's how I got introduced to all the stuff, and my dad was a big fan, and he read all the stuff. My dad loves to read sports almanacs and stories, and He's the kind of guy who reads books about baseball and has books about baseball all over the house. So this is how I got into it. And so Bill James was a fixture of my childhood in a sense. The books were everywhere, and I loved to read that kind of stuff. So
I was going to say,
it was kind of a thrill to meet him.
I kind of blanked out as I was trying to take the photo. There is now a photo. We need to get this up on the blog, but there is now a photo of me next to George Karl. That happened. And Arturo has, I've got to give you the clutch shot of the conference. Arturo got a picture of me photobombing Phil Jackson wearing a shirt saying, "I want Phil Jackson to coach my fantasy squad." You somehow, we'll have to blow up the shirt if we.
And again,
we
I think the shirt is even more appropriate because in essence, that's what James Dolan just did. Apparently, he saw the shirt. He didn't like the Masai shirt, and he apparently wants Phil Jackson to coach his fantasy team from California by phone.
Oh yeah, and the shirts, by the way, that's the huge thing. Jeremy Britton, Forgotten Boy on Twitter. I'll link him in the thing because he's missing a letter in his name, I think because of link restrictions on Twitter. But Jeremy Britton designed the shirts again, thanks to the people who made suggestions in the comments. But the shirts at Sloan, always a big hit. This is the second year in a row we've done them. I love them, and next year we're going to do them again. It's going to be. We'll have to think of more good. We'll have to up our game.
I think the Masai shirt was the favorite, which is the if Masai calls, tell him you're not here. And I think it was loved by two audiences. The Raptors guys all loved it. And when I say the Raptors guy, I mean the Raptors front office guys all loved it. We're all sending pictures of it to their boss. And I think the Knicks beat writers. Every Knicks fan just had something to do with that shirt. There was a call for, can we make 10,000 of them for the protest they're having?
I was surprised because what was it? If you viewed this as like a music concert, I scheduled it. I wore it the night before when there's pre-conference parties, and so I wore it that night because I was like, okay, the Phil Jackson shirt and the Morey shirt, they're going to both be at the conference. These are the stars, and the reception to the Masai shirt was just so great that I was like, wow. And so that was a big hit, and that makes me happy. Also kind of sad as a former. Guess I'm still a Nugget. I don't know. Fareed's on the team, so I guess I'll stay a Nuggets fan, but I don't like it. Anyway, on that note, after the effusive praise, as Brian put it in the producer notes, time to start complaining. I feel we should just get the elephant out of the room because this can come off as sour grapes, so let's just address it. You had a paper you submitted to Sloan. While I could give reasons why I would have not, obviously you ran out of time. It wasn't necessarily as polished as I would have liked. I still thought it was a better paper than some of the ones that got in. But just to make sure when we are criticizing the paper process at Sloan, I at least want that out there that we did try and submit one that did not get accepted. And just make sure that that's the air is clear and say, we understand that. We understand the reasons possibly it didn't. But then the issue we have is the papers that did get accepted, there are more than a few problems with both what we would call the process as to how they got accepted, and then not only that, kind of just in general, portraying Sloan as an academic conference associated with MIT.
Yeah, I think, and for people who haven't read these papers, and again, I think the key issue is the fact that being portrayed as academic research papers. And the first part is, I think there were 8 papers that made it onto the presentation panel, of which 7 were all using proprietary data sets, be it Brozone or PitchFX or the Sports View. And it came off a little more like a kind of a marketing, they're selling and again, these guys are all sponsors, so they kind of tended to favor these proprietary data sets, which a couple problems. One, obviously they're sponsors to the conference. I think the other one is the fact that it's really hard for you if it's public data set, you can actually go see it and actually confirm the findings. Where it's a private, then it kind of becomes a problem. I think
to clarify for basketball, all 4 of the papers that were accepted that were basketball specific used Sports VU data.
Yeah. Which again, it's a bit of a conflict of interest. I think the other thing is if you're going to present these papers as academic papers, then you should submit these to academic rigor. And of the 8 papers, there was one paper in particular, which was the Major League Baseball payroll has no correlation to wins, which anybody who's ever read anything we've ever written is going to say, wait a second, that's not an original paper. This is something that, Dave, was chapter 4 of Wages of Wins way back in the day. We've written ink everywhere on this. and presenting this as a novel finding is disingenuous at best and like unethical at worst. I think and again, I read the paper. There's no good references on it. It's not original. Anything that he's publishing, it's a bad paper. And in fact, it was so bad that I said, look, I'm not even going to go to this presentation because I may get upset and like make a scene to the author, because again, I thought it was just a poorly presented paper that would have never gotten onto an academic conference.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, the one potential argument I could have given them against ours, and I mean, you knew this because as a disadvantage, unfortunately, that many of the great people that contribute to this field have, is you have a real job. And so when it comes to sitting down and having time to write a giant paper, I think we would have liked to have given it maybe one or two more edits, but that's fine. The paper that got in about competitive balance and paying in baseball, et cetera, essentially it too was lacking any polish or flair or anything. It was poorly written. I apologize if you're watching this and you wrote the paper. I'm sorry. I mean, but you got in, so I'll be mean. It's I'm like, you got your ticket punched to Sloan. You got to present in front of a room. So I'm not actually going to apologize for calling it out and saying it was non-original. And not only was it non-original research, it was non-original, non-researched research. Because if you look in the credits, the only real novel thing that is cited is Soccernomics. And I believe, I'll have to actually check my copy of Soccernomics. I believe Soccernomics at least references wages of wins once in it. So like this and that. So getting on that note, by the way, to try and get off this paper, to just stop bashing it. If you look at the works cited in all of these papers, it's, for most of them, it's really, really sparse. And that's again, that's problematic. It's okay if we want to present these as Sports VU sends their findings to Sloan, right? That's fine. If Sports VU says, we're working with these 4 schools or we're working with these 5 companies, here's what they found, that's fine. But the fact that they have this submission process and then act as if it's academic rigor is, to me, disingenuous at best.
And again, they're being presented as like kind of these innovative kind of findings, and really, and again, we were having this argument on email about this. Is like, there's 2 of the papers in particular we were talking about where like, another 2 papers where the findings is for findings similar to these have been presented. And I think, and I'm not going to specifically call them out because again, they do make like valid points and they're a different way of looking at it, and they do kind of at least refer to the previous research. Even though I don't love the references they actually put down, because if you're going to kind of work on somebody else's research, you should at least accredit it in your references. I think you have to have that rigor. Again, it looked like the academic vetting for these papers was not great.
It was terrible. I mean, that's what I mean. And I think the other thing is, and by the way, we've been nice to him and we like the guy. So Kirk Goldsberry, this clearly shows the conflict of interest, where you basically read that paper and said, this is interesting, but it's not there yet, right? Like basically, if you were I was going to say, if you were the editor, you'd basically say, this is a great first pass, Kirk, go back and do this, 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 and this, and then you can present it.
It wasn't really Kirk was actually helping. It was another group of people who were actually doing it. And I think there are 2 really interesting, that's the point-wise paper. There's 2 really interesting things that they did. One is, I like the EV work that they did in the math they did to calculate the value of the different transactions. But even talking to them into the room, they admitted that what they presented was something, they basically presented something because they wanted to get something on the conference. But there were some serious flaws in the way they actually set up the model. One, they're not talking about the value of other transactions. 2, they're not a value proposition. I think I explained the paper in the article I'm going to have tomorrow, but there were some real issues. And rather than, it's not a polished product, and there's some real issues that are well known within people who actually build this kind of models. And I think they kind of knew it too. As I said, they were just trying to get something up that could be kind of at the conference and on the front page of Grantland. And I think, I understand why they did it, but it's kind of a misnomer to say, like, you're not doing it for academic purposes.
We've now shown, that's the thing. Is like, if they want to present an EOS paper, or they want to just give them, like, there's no problem. Like, Kirk Goldsberry was one of the stars of last year's Sloan. There's no problem just saying, we're going to have Kirk Goldsberry talk about his research at Sloan. They have invited speakers already. There's no reason against that.
They could have done that as an ESPN kind of panel, and I think it would have worked. And again, I think the point we're getting to is, like, if you're going to go in that direction, I mean, there's a couple things. One, you can't present it as academic papers the way it's actually set up unless you're going to have real academic betting. That's the first one. I think the second point is that if you're going to have it be on proprietary data sets, then maybe you need to have like a separate competition between what's proprietary and what's like, what is public data. And if you're going to do it that way, let's have two separate competitions.
He didn't mention this, so the grade there, unfortunately, this is how all interviews go. We talked to the guy for 30 to 40 minutes. Arturo and I were on either side of him. And you get two sound bites out of that, right? Like Arturo has a really good quote. Arturo, your quote in that article, the MIT one about Sloan, is great. And then mine is a valid point and a good point, but I was like, yeah, I can't replicate the findings any of these people are doing. Like you got the better quote in that article. But that said, when you look at these papers and kind of present them as such, and a suggestion you made was, what if you just opened up the floor? What if you released a subsection of the data to the community, give proposals?
To be very specific, I said, if you're going to do if you want to make it so that it's paper submitted on the proprietary data set for SportsView, say this is the data that we have, submit proposals. Instead of having the abstract, submit a proposal saying this is the research I want to do, and here's my abstract, and have the committee select it, and then you sign in on the disclosure agreement, you get in, you get access, you do your paper, and you present it, and then it belongs to SportsView to do whatever they want with it. And I think if you want to do it that way, that'd be fun. What you could
also do is you could give a subset of the data, right? You could give the data away for free. You could give a subset of the data, say, do what you want with this data, submit something by this date, and whichever the bests are in. But I mean, the simple point of the matter is now, either you need to be a school or a company that has access to the SportsView data, or in the case of I have no idea. I still, we mentioned we didn't go to that panel because we'd be true. I have no idea how that paper got in. As best I can tell, I'm going to look at the cover really quick.
People who really didn't know the subject matter, because again, this is something that, it's not like this wasn't covered in the New York Times. It hasn't been covered before. Hell, I've written like 4 or 5 things on this.
The only thing I can figure out, and this just sounds mean, is the guy who wrote it is Martin Kleinbard. I'm calling you out. He goes to the Columbia Business School, so this really feels like some weird kind of nepotism connection between East Coast elite schools. That's the best I got.
Again, I think I'm going to go with the students who reviewed the paper had no clue this is research that's been presented before.
You're trying to defend East Coast schools over there for some odd reason, Arturo.
Well, no, it's not defending East Coast school. I'm just assuming because they're saying, it goes against the findings of the Blue Ribbon Commission. But again, this was when the Blue Ribbon Commission report came out. There were articles written at length, and as I said, the 4th chapter of Wages of Wins is directly about addressing the findings of the Blue Ribbon Commission by baseball and saying these are false. Payroll does not correlate to wins, and it never has, right? And again, I'm not going to get. I don't want to get bogged down into this. I'm just saying, look, if you're going to present yourself as a research paper competition within an academic conference which is associated with the MIT Sloan School, then you need to have some academic review and some academic rigor. And if you've done that and done the research, you would have found that this paper is something that has been presented multiple times. And again, you would have said, hey, this is a nice paper, some of the other ones, but you need to add accreditation to this, and this, because this is prior research. And you're even calling it out in the paper, saying you're done doing work addressing. There was, I said, the Soccernomics and the ref. What's the name of the ref bias book? Same thing that was also called out in another one of the papers and wasn't referenced. I think some of the ref bias stuff as well was. Again, this research exists. It was done. It's presented. It's fine if you're doing research or you're taking an alternative path to previously done research, but you have to refer it. You have to call out the previous work.
Well, I mean, all we're basically saying is, just to make kind of our thesis clear, some of the papers at Sloan had major problems. The point-wise piece had a major problem in that in essence, it just wasn't ready, but it got put on because of its association with SportsView and Grant.
I think.
I'll finish. I'll let you hop in. I'm gonna run down the competitive balance paper was just off. That should not have been accepted for anything. Yeah. The other papers, some of them were good. And so, by the way,
one that won the rebounding paper. If you go out and read the rebounding paper does not quite. And again, I talked to them. They basically had an issue. They couldn't put they couldn't put the data, the best data on the paper because of the NDAs that they have. But in the room, when they presented that in the room, the things they showed in that room, it was the best presentation at the entire conference, and it's a better presentation than the paper actually was. And I mean, it's good research, but did a great job of actually presenting it in the room. So that
By the
was
way,
a problem with that
the
paper.
second spectrum guys, and I actually want to call them out because I've talked to them a few times. It's the 3 dimensions of rebounding. I'm calling them all out. I don't care about going over Brian because these guys are awesome. Rajiv Maheswaran, Yuhan Chang, Jeff Su, Sheldon Kwok, Tal Levy. Oh, another Levy. I guess they're just awesome in the field of sports analytics. Adam Wexler and Noel Hollingsworth. Those, ton of people on that paper. And I mean, that's one of the things that really showed about that paper. They have a company that they've built. They started as academic research. They were convinced to start their own company. They have a bunch of people working full time on this, working with teams. It showed, right? When they presented at Sloan, it showed that these people have put the work in, whereas, the competitive balance paper read like a last second, midterm paper you had to do for a college class.
Yeah, no, the second
paper
spectrum guys basically read like they had all these NDAs they couldn't actually get like the killer graphs on, so they were limited what they can put in. But when you got in the room and they actually showed you the tools, these guys rocked. They knew exactly what it was doing. They were a professional outfit kind of presenting. I think the next one is the hot hand bias, which and I call it the hot hand bias. What they proved in that paper wasn't that the hot hand exists. It's that the offensive player and the defensive player both believe the hot hand exists, so their behavior is changed by it. The offensive player takes harder shots, right? Which actually reduces efficiency because
I don't know
now
you're talking. You're like right there was like incredulous, as if the audience, like you were anticipating the audience to disagree with you. We're not filmed in front of a live studio audience. I was there. I agree with you. I love the paper.
Well, no, but no, what I'm saying is like people are the hot hand exists. No, the bias. People believe it exists and they adjust accordingly. But basically, because the bias exists, because the offensive and defensive adjust the strategy because of it, the findings of the previous papers, which said like, look, when the guy just supposedly starts getting hot, his efficiency actually goes down because he takes worse shots and he gets covered harder, right? So basically, like the findings of the previous paper held, and it's being presented like it counteracts the findings of every other paper that's ever been done on this, which is just annoying to me.
Yeah, what to me was good about that paper, and we talked with an analytics guy, I won't say the team, but he made the point that a lot of times people in these analytics, I try and make sure we don't fall prey to this, but of course, every stats blog does. They'll ask questions that aren't really relevant, right? We get so invested in data that people will say, so-and-so can run this fast. That was one of the papers last year at Sloan. It was about how fast people ran. And I forget who said this quote. I'm really bad. Was it Stan Van Gundy? I'm trying to
Stan Van Gundy basically said, why do I care that this guy runs these many miles?
No, he said that, but I'm saying somebody made the point. It says, until we start asking I think it was Ian Levy of Hickory High, so until we start asking the right questions of the data, it's not going to matter how much data we get. And that was why the hot hand paper to me was so great, is that it asked an important question. Instead of saying, does the hot hand exist? What would it look like if the stats model, if it did? Here's a simulation, et cetera, et cetera. They said, what is the impact on the perception of the hot hand? And that's hugely important.
Which, again, I think the best papers, the 3-dimensional rebounding ask good questions. The hot hand bias paper asked good questions, but they I'm unhappy that they misinterpreted the result to actually get basically they misrepresented their results as clickbait. So basically they said they called it one thing, and really if you read it, it's something different. And I think they did it. It was a choice they did on purpose. They didn't do it by accident, which kind of upset me. I think the soccer the one on the difference in strategies in soccer is an interesting question. I disagree with their findings, but it's an interesting question. I think the ref bias one is fantastic in terms of kind of asking an interesting question, getting an interesting result. I think the machine learning for taking the pitchers in and out of games is also a very interesting question. I think identifying screens using machines is a very interesting question. As I said this before, the GMs, the people who were representing teams in the room were very interested, and they were talking about that particular paper. So I think the author of that paper did a really good job because he's a student, and there's apparently a job waiting for him on an NBA team when he wants it.
Fantastic. That is a fantastic way to transition out. Brian, thank you so much for letting us go over. Actually, I'm kind of happy that we went over by complimenting some of the papers we liked, because it's easy to come away with the impression that Arturo and I did not like any of the papers at Sloan.
That's not true.
I think Sloan does allow some great research to be shown. It's kind of funny because when Sloan started, it was a really hackneyed thing, right? I talked to Dean Oliver. Sloan is over $500 a ticket at this point, unless you're a student. I guess year one it was like $20 or $50. It was like in a classroom. So Sloan has just grown by leaps and bounds, and I think they just haven't scaled some of the stuff with that they need to. Some of the other stuff they've scaled great. Like I said, they're great guests and stuff they've done slam dunk on. But that point you made where you said a job waiting for them, the last topic I wanted to talk about was reality versus sports, and how Sloan, obviously the silver panel really showed it, Colangelo talking. And so that point about the job being weighted, Brian Colangelo, he's like Kobe to me. He's one of my favorite GMs because he's that overrated, I guess I'll call him. He admitted to tanking, which was great. But his other point is he made an off-the-cuff comment where he said, our analytics team had basically a $250,000 budget for 3 guys, and this is important, he said, and equipment. So that is chump change if you're looking at the tech.
And again,
world.
I think to so people understand, I think Colangelo was making the point that he was tanking and it was kind of one after the fact point where like he's kind of, you're not sure whether he's being serious or he's just using that as a defense later on. And I think he was making the point that he spent, I actually spent $250,000 on analytic. It was really important to me. And I think we were all kind of laughing because we're saying like, look, if you're in the real world, $250,000 in analytics gets you nothing. And I think if we're looking at this, if I'm in my job, and again, I'm doing this kind of work and I'm competing in this market, this is not the amount of money that I'm spending. And I think and again, this is going up tomorrow, but I think the key panel for me was the media panel, where like
let's finish on the Colangelo, because the media panel, by the way, the media panel is probably going to take us to the end, because that was one of my favorites too.
Yeah, I think
so. I'm going to shove that forward a little bit.
I think the thing with Colangelo, which is it's kind of this vision that if you're in analytics and you're working for a team, you should be happy to be there, right? And these teams that are spending this minimum amount of money on this, and there's a contrast. If you start looking at, if you go to baseball, the Red Sox aren't spending $250,000 on analytics. The Red Sox are spending way more money on this. And again, I think there's an article I read today. I think it was Grambling. It's Moneyball with money, right? So they're talking about the things that the Red Sox are doing, where like they're doing all these advanced analytics things and they're doing all these like advantage strategies, but they're spending money on it because they figured out that they need to keep spending money to keep having an edge, right? So the really smart teams will understand it. And I think what's really interesting, we're going to go into that in a bit, which is it's not only the teams, but it's everybody who's actually a player in the media market for sports kind of does not willing to pay for tech savvy persons, and this is going to cost them because
wow, that was beautiful. So now let's go to the media. Man, I'd love to talk more about the other one. So yeah, let's go to the media panel. Yeah, this was great.
Let me set the stage. So we're at this is actually in the second room in the morning. First panel we went to in the morning on the second day, and we walk in the room, and there are representatives from the different leagues. There's representatives from ESPN, and I have his name, but I forget it right now. It was the sports director.
I'll look it up. I'm at Sloan. So, and
basically what's happening is they're talking about media rights and how that's shifting. And it was a really interesting panel because there was a real disconnect between what is actually going to happen with media rights content and what the teams were doing. So just to give a picture, I mean, like, so you understand, basically, live sports is the most valuable real estate in entertainment right now. It's the one thing that's not going down in price. The ratings aren't going down, and the cost of, like, the value of it's only going up continuously. So where it gets interesting is that, all these media rights and all these contracts are coming up, and, there's all these classic media companies who kind of are doing the job. But, if you have League Pass or you have NFL Direct Ticket or you have any of these things, it's not a great product. And if as a consumer, I'm not getting what I want in terms of NBA content or NFL content or everything else. And I think what was interesting is before this panel, this was actually brought up, the WWE released their WWE Network, where they're basically giving all their customers for $15. I think it's like $10 a month, $11 a month. You get access to all the pay-per-views, every bit of programming they have, and all their historical archives. So if you want to watch like a WrestleMania from 1984, you can go on and just immediately watch it without no concerns in HD content.
And by the way, it's Frank Golding is of
Frank Golding, yes.
And by the way, no, he's for Google.
No, he used to work for ESPN. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's even more telling.
That's why he was taking shots. He was taking shots at ESPN partly. I think that was a hidden subtext. Is he was actually in the room. It felt like he was a guy who wanted to do these things at ESPN, didn't have the funding, and then he got hired away by Google. So again, what was interesting about this was nobody in the room really understood like digital rights from like the old like. So Jeannie Buss is talking about how the Lakers signed this $1 billion contract with Comcast for 20 years. Like it's a good thing. And like my reaction to it is, wow, that's really a low price for a 20-year contract. It looks good now, but it's a contract that's going to start looking really, really bad as we go forward because, as I said, media rights are only going up. So the Lakers are basically locked in at a 2014 price for the next 20 years. And I think this is going to be a real disadvantage to them going forward because the cost of this is going to explode. It's only going to go up across the board. And I think they kind of realized because some of the other contracts that have been signed made this kind of look like a bad thing, not a good thing. And again, I think, Google's in the room, and the reason they're in the room, there's this whole rumor that they're going to get the NFL package, which is currently owned by DirecTV, but it's going to lapse. So there's a real thought that the NFL is going to get into a partnership with Google. And the reason I brought in the WWE Network is the thought is that it's going to be something like the WWE Network, where it gets interesting is, the thought maybe a year ago when they started talking about this, it was going to be like a classic like broadcast on TV, you get it on your devices kind of thing. But now with what the WWE has done, which is like they provide their content on every single device that you have, why would would the NFL necessarily have to go through broadcast media to sell their games, or can they just sell to you on your computer?
So, basically, a pay-as-you-go system. By the way, on that point, so the WWE is fascinating to me. I haven't been the biggest wrestling fan, and that's changed a lot in the recent years as I've studied, like this is the classic analytical Dre. I've studied the history of the sport, kind of the goings-on of the sport, and so like I don't really enjoy watching wrestling matches, but I have a lot of respect for like reading storylines and reading how characters came to be. And one of the points that came up on the Real GM podcast that you and Daniel made was basically WWE makes the realization that if a person is hot, they give you more of that person. In the WWE Network, you're pointing out, if a person is hot, they give you more access to them. And in fact, even me, right? Netflix has documentaries for Triple H, The Rock, The Undertaker, Stone Cold, Mankind, Bret Hart. If you're just interested about the history of these wrestlers, they have fantastic like some of the most well-produced documentaries. Really, like ESPN 30 for 30 is right.
If you watch it, you're going to want to buy the merchandise, and you're going to want to get more, and actually going to go to live shows so they can do that. And I think
exactly. And then
there's a great philosophy, which is from the guy who's part of Toyota Production System, who says, "Look, my job, right? So here's your money, right? Here's my product. There's a certain amount of time between me. I get an order from you and try to get this to you. So." What I want to do is I want to make it I want to shorten that amount of time the most as possible so that basically, I can get from order to money as quickly as possible. And I think Vince McMahon understands what it needs to do to actually get that. I think the reason why I think things are going to change is because, basically in that panel, Google stood up and said, like, look, nobody here understands like search engine optimization and content and delivering content and targeted ad sales, and nobody has the research arm and the intelligence arm and the program arm that I have. And if you give me your content, I will make sure we maximize the amount of money that we can make from your content.
Okay, and on that note, so here this subject, right, is the disconnect between reality and sports. So here's a problem. WWE, The Rock gets popular, Stone Cold gets popular. Like I said, I watched both these documentaries. These were kind of surprises, and you're like, bam, what does Vince McMahon do? He gets them. He gets them on all the merch immediately. He gets them on the live shows immediately. He gets them on the pay-per-views immediately. The NBA in the first season, and I apologize, I'll try and find the tweet because a fantastic Twitter commenter who said this to me. But in the first year that Kevin Durant won his first scoring title, he was on one nationally televised game. The NBA does not understand. At this point, our old model at the Wages of Wins was stadium sales, right? You want to increase the revenue for stadium sales, which means you want to show winners. The new model, though, with the global market is you want to put the best product out to the world, which means if Kevin Durant's on one national game and he's your top scorer and he's the up-and-coming star, you have failed, and you clearly don't understand the business.
Well, I think here's the thing. I think that the new commissioner, and from what we saw from Silver, he's a more kind of tuned in kind of guy, and he's more open to this sort of thing. So I think that, again, I think the NBA will be open to this. I think the reason I think the Google NFL partnership is going to happen is because basically there's nobody like the NFL at making money. The NFL is all about money, right? So they are very profit motivated. They will do anything they can to make more money, and so I think they're going to be driving this bus down the path. And I said where it becomes really interesting is, and we were realizing in this room, it's like, as we said, basically the old media companies don't pay for web developers. They don't pay for guys who develop content. They don't want.
So watch this, Arturo. As a perfect example, I'm going to go to NBA.com and I'm going to unplug my thing right now. This is a major beef I have. So I'm going to just go take a look. What happened at the Thunder game against the Lakers? This is awesome. I love this. Who doesn't love this? Wait for it. Oh, yeah, isn't that great? It just automatically starts playing a video.
Oh, I hate that.
Isn't that amazing? That is the most awesome web development, and it's been that way for years now.
I was complaining about this, which is if I go to the NBA site on my phone and I want to see, I look at schedules and results all the time, and I've stopped going to the ESPN website because when I go to the ESPN website, it sends me to it doesn't give me the option. It sends me to the mobile site, and the mobile site does not let me see the full season schedule. I want to see the best site for the schedule is the ESPN desktop site for it, but I can't access it on my phone. So screw it. I'm going to the CBS site, right? So because your web development sucks, you're giving me something that I don't want, which is like a 10-year-old web design, and I'm going it sucks. I'm going to move on. But the point I was going to make is so basically Google just got done kind of beating Yahoo and Microsoft, and now we're going to get into a content war with ABC, NBC, and Fox, and I think ESPN. I think everybody in the room kind of understood or got the feeling that they were going to talk. They started talking about, oh, Fox is coming into the market and NBC is coming into the market, and then the Google guy was basically just going yeah, okay, yeah, that's cute. Right.
Now, to be fair, and I'm going to throw this out there. This is the same problem we have with sports teams. Brian and I were talking about this before, where if you examine every single, and this includes the Spurs, by the way, every single NBA team has at one point or another been willing to give a flyer of a couple $1 million to essentially a bench player. It is unacceptable, NBA teams, for you to not pony up the money for proper analytics guys. The same thing is true now of ESPN. If you go to the DIS is great. It talks about the True Hoop Network. You were awesome, Arturo. You ran into Henry Abbott, and you gave him an earful, and he was actually very receptive. There is potential for ESPN if they give Henry Abbott control.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say this. It's always fascinating to me when these people are so when Henry Abbott gives me, and actually I didn't know he had an interview about what he sees the direction of True Hoop Network in the future now. Of the ESPN and NBA coverage, and it was a long interview. And actually I didn't know he'd actually done that. And I pretty much ran it back with him, and I spent 20 minutes talking to him about this, and it was he was willing to answer questions, and we talked about it and how they, what are they looking for to do and what's the synergy. And I think I wrote about this as well. And again, I think they have to change what they're doing, right? And I think Grantland's done a great job on that side. I think 538 will be interesting because the people who are associated with it. And you have to kind of think about what you're delivering and how you modify it to the experience. And I think that's what's coming. And what's going to be different is the broadcast model is dying. And I have a real feeling that
What
You
was the
know,
great? You remember it better than me. What was the Google guy? Perfect shot across the bow. In
well, they were
reference.
talking about the ESP, they were talking about, and the Google guy makes an appeal, but at one point made an appeal to the almost. And again, they were asking, he wasn't confirming it, but he was saying, look, here's what I would do for you. If I was, if it's like, if you marry me, here's how your life is going to be if you marry me, right? And so like the ESPN guy comes up and says, no, 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 but we've been together for a while. I'm going to take care of you. We have all these relationships. We're great at selling all these athletes and marketing and doing that. And we put together this great content. And the Google guy kind of looks at him and goes, the Sunday edition of the New York Times is great, but nobody reads it, right? So the thing is, it's almost like you're in the room and you get in the feel in the room where, like, basically, it's much like print. I think the classic kind of media content companies are in real trouble because, again, it's not about getting it on TV.
So here's the
I don't watch TV. I just use my iPad. I use my phone. I got my computer. I don't want to watch it when you want to give it to me. I want to watch it when I want to watch it. And I don't want to pay for the things that you want to give me. I want to pay for the things that I want, right?
What I will say to that is, here's the point. Here's the advantage ESPN has, and actually, I'll give you a canary for the situation. If Henry Abbott gets signed by Google, it's over. Because the one edge these companies have, and this has been a classic one. I think I had the quants need to strike back. There's been a classic problem with basically really analytic people who look at the numbers, and you could even kind of classify as one of them, and really good sports fans who kind of understand the sporting experience. And you need to merge those together. And the problem Google will have, and I've seen this on other things, I mean, look at Google Plus. Google Plus is what happens when you get the best engineers in the world working on social media without understanding social media. I'm sorry. Maybe someday Google Plus will be a good product. Maybe it'll be like Xbox and Xbox Live. But at the moment, it shows to me what happens when you have people that don't understand the market they're in trying to design a product for it. Well, and I fear Google could run into the same spot with sports. But if Google
I'm not talking about sports coverage. I'm talking about sports content and sports
even that I'm saying having people who understand and love the business, but also have an understanding of the technology and medium has changed. That's an advantage. And in theory, ESPN's got the lead there, right? They've got people who've understood the biz. But if they don't have people,
if they're not willing to pay for web development, they're going to be in real trouble. And I think that, and I tweeted this at the time. I said, look, if I was a student right now, I'd be throwing my all and doubling down and going into like web development and kind of that whole world, because I do think there's going to be a bidding war. Because as I said, there is no more valuable real estate than sports content, live sports content. And it's all about, as I said, and this is a fight I had. This is the first year I have League Pass, because last year and the years before, the league didn't want to sell me League Pass because supposedly I was in this market. I had to go to my cable company. And there was a whole thing. They didn't want to sell it to me. So I had money that I wanted to give to the NBA, and I couldn't give the money to the NBA, right? And
well, then we have our good friend Patrick, who, basically, he says, hey, I'm a big fan of this team. Like blackout restrictions. They just somebody needs to kick those down. Those are ridiculous in sports.
Yeah, it's silly that I can't watch the NBA TV game. It really annoys the crap out of me. There's an NBA TV game on, and I cannot watch it. There's a great game on. I want to watch it. I want to write about it. I want to tweet about it, and I cannot watch it. The NBA, they're not even giving me the option of paying like $5 or $10 additional on my League Pass to get the NBA TV. Like, look, I'd pay $10 to get a year of the NBA TV. I pay direct to the NBA easy. Like, add $10 on the subscription. I'll pay the $10 and I'll get
Hell,
NBA
I mean, by the way, if you look at like the Amazon, and by the way, I love Amazon Prime and I love Netflix. Amazon Prime, I'm like, man, I really hate those ads on Hulu. You know what? I'd really like my wife and I, Game of Thrones. I'm willing to pay $2.99 for an episode of Game of Thrones that we can watch streaming on Chromecast or my Xbox. I'm willing to pay that. The NBA says, look, the going rate for an hour of television is approximately $3, right? The going rate, it's like $2 for a half-hour sitcom, $3 to $4 for an hour-long television show. They could say, look, you want to watch this thing live, and you're not a past subscriptor, it's $5. Like, that's fine. They could do that. That's the market has already set the value for the content they have, and they're not willing to sell it, and that to me is problematic.
Which, yeah, and again, I think it's the same thing with the NFL, who's basically tied themselves into knots with the this DirecTV package. It's really hard for. I mean, I had to go through hoops to get the NFL league. I had it on the PS3 before. This year, I had to go out and buy I own a. I'm a PlayStation guy. I do not own an Xbox, but I own the Madden Xbox game for this year because it came with an NFL subscription to the NFL Sunday Ticket, which, so basically I paid for a game I'm never going to use so I could actually get the free subscription to it because it's the only mechanism for me to have access to the Sunday Ticket games on my computer. It's really, really ridiculous. Other than like illegally viewing them on like European sites or basically going out and getting DirecTV. And I'm not getting DirecTV because where I live, it rains. And when it rains, you can't see DirecTV.
I was going to say, it really bugs me because I'll make these comments on our blog, on Twitter, and I'll invariably get somebody responding to me, hey, just pirate it, right? Here's this site. And it's like, you don't understand. I'm an adult. I make good money. I make good money because I don't work for an NBA team. Seriously, just pay your developers NBA teams. Seriously. Yeah. They're worth it. They're good people. So, by the way, you know what, Sloan, you mentioned the on-ball screen person?
Yeah.
There was a basically equivalent of that person. They worked with the Second Spectrum team. There was a developer, I forget her name, but she was on the first rebounding paper they did, I think, 2 years back.
Yeah.
Guess what happened with her?
What happened to her?
She went and worked with Microsoft. And I could tell when I was talking with them the first year they were at Sloan, I could tell that she was one of the major driving developers behind their stuff because the other people were professors. She was the student who was writing the MATLAB code and stuff. What happened? She doesn't work with an NBA team. She goes and works with Microsoft because her skills are in demand.
Probably makes more money than you and I put together.
Exact. Well, I don't know. Well, I work for myself, so I'm freelance, so the month to month. But and then what I will say about the Second Spectrum guys, they don't go work for a team. They form their own company. And they were talking, with I'm glad they're at Sloan. I'm glad they were talking with the people they were talking with because I really hope their research gets more free and shown on more platforms. But that on-ball screen guy, he's not working for an NBA team. Are you kidding me? The Spurs guy comes up with the ticket. You know who else came up with the ticket? There were a bunch of Google people there. There were people with Google Glass there going, oh, wait, you can automatically recognize an on-ball screen? Like hell, he's going to work for an NBA team. He's going to have to love the NBA so much that he's going to have to turn down over six-figure, in the six-figure range from Google as an entry level if they saw him. And that's my prediction.
And again, we don't want to sound like, again, I think it's about who's going to be willing to pay for the edge, right? And edge doesn't come cheap. You're going to have to do that. And I think we are moving more towards kind of a siloed proprietary data thing, and we're going to move into like the data wars in a sense, or like what happens in baseball where teams that are smart actually win. This is what they do. And again, here's the thing. In baseball, teams pay for analytics. They pay for it. And they have high-paid consultants. They have departments. They understand this is how you maximize the value of your assets. And I think this is something that's slowly coming to the other sports. And again, we can argue whatever you want, but baseball pays for this, and the baseball kind of figured out that you either pay for it or you you have real problems.
Well, one issue that I'll actually give you, because you pointed out the frontier, is if you look at Silicon Valley, one advantage that the places I've worked for in Colorado have had is that I don't want to move. I like where I'm living. But most NBA teams pretty much mandate that you move and work crazy hours. And if that is a constraint, you do not look any better than moving to Silicon Valley. And there is a shortage. So funny note, I'll end us on this kind of, we were talking reality versus sports. In sports, there are all these rules about paying players and restricting payer play.
You really want to get into this one? Okay.
I do. Well, I'm going to end on this. So if you look, there was actually collusion between Apple and Google back in the day where they basically agreed not to poach each other's employees. And guess what happened? This went public. There is a lawsuit about it because it's not viewed as okay. You are not allowed to basically agree with each other not to pay employees to keep their salaries artificially deflated. What does the NBA do by default? So all I was going to say is, if you're viewing sports versus tech, in tech, these crazy artificial salary rules get busted down before they even can stand up. And so if you're a stand-up web developer, you're going to go work in the Valley. You're not going to go work for an NBA team right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if I necessarily want to get into the whole NCAA thing because I think that's topic for a whole podcast. But I'll say this. I'll make the one point, which is there's four major sports in the U.S. It's hockey, baseball, football, and basketball. Two of them are or have been historically viewed as predominantly white, which are going to be hockey and baseball. Two of them have been predominantly been African American black sports or like with black majority athletes. And the two that have indentured servitude, in which like you have to like you're forced to play without paying, you can't immediately go to the league, are the two that are predominantly black. Whereas in baseball and hockey, if you can play, you can get into the NHL. And you were making the point, like we've had NHL players make the request to get in as young as what, 15, 16 to professional leagues. And in Major League Baseball, you get drafted, you get paid. But like
well,
the two sports that are predominantly black don't get paid.
Like I said, and Harvard is a perfect example. If Adam Silver gets his way, you're going to have to graduate your sophomore year at college before you can go to the NBA. While he was at Harvard, Mark Zuckerberg got $9,000 from his Brazilian roommate to work on Facebook.
Can I make a clarification before I get into trouble, which is I'm not implying that the NBA or the owners are necessarily racist now. I'm saying the conceit of how the system got into place is something that is inherently racist or historically racist, because it's to me it's kind of evident that the sports that are primarily composed of black athletes are the ones where you have these restrictions on actually like making and earning your pay for professional services. Right, which if for some reason don't happen in the sports that aren't. But I want to make the point. I'm not implying that. I'm saying because I think right now that it's purely incentive and money driven. But I think the historical reasons we wind up in the space is because there are some racist overtones to it. Keep going.
What I will give you on that, by the way, and I think you actually make a good point when we talk racism in the United States, because it's still pretty rampant. We're both got Latino backgrounds and. From my perspective, we have a state that wants to outlaw being brown. Like Arizona is the most crazy state.
Well, but there's whole demographic reasons about that, because Arizona is like the oldest state because people retired to it. So you get all this crazy stuff. That's like, this is why Arizona is always 20 years behind the time. But
that may be true. But I'm saying, yeah, when we're talking but when you talk racism in the United States, I think it's important that you point out that we have systems in place that have racial biases that we have to address, because what I found happens, like you made the term indentured servitude, which is I 100% agree with, by the way. I find people get really riled up when you start bringing up phrases like slavery. That the book $40 Million Slaves, fantastic read. Everyone should read it. It's about sports, college athletics, paying athletes, the racial overtones and their history. People get riled up and say, I'm not a racist. And the answer needs to be, okay, that's fine, but you have to understand there's a system in place that has problems and we need to fix those problems.
And you're supporting a system that actually has those overtones. And I think I made this point on Twitter today, which is like legally and for tax purposes, athletes are no different than cattle. And they're treated as such. Look up the roster depreciation allowance and the fact that you're able to treat athletes like cattle and depreciate them like that. So this is not something we're making up. This is something that actually exists, right? So it's a real kind of, and again, if at least the athletes who are professionals get paid, but then we're submitting them to a system like college football is I could never let a family member play college football because I would really feel bad about it, because you're submitting your body to like all this terrible damage and you're not getting compensated. And it's like inhuman conditions. Like if it was like if I have some OSHA codes, I have to rely on my site, on my facility, and that's not a safe workplace. And I think there's we've gotten way off topic here with the NCAA.
We'll have to do this basically kind of like Lost or a television show. In fact, I'm willing, before this podcast, you, myself, and Brian. Would you want to have this as a podcast unless something pops up, unless, Kobe retires or something in the next week? I'd actually really love to have racial overtones in professional sports, because it's something we kind of talk about regularly, but it was a great conversation. I think
more than racist overtones, I think we should basically take a stab at the whole NCAA thing. And I think actually one point as I said, we can get into this whole thing because there's some really kind of, this goes to this whole thing and this whole argument like, it's a different environment. It's the whole Jonathan Martin story. We're like, no, the locker room's different. No, it's not. There's an Equal Opportunity Act. There are certain restrictions you have to abide to in the workplace. There are certain laws of the land, right? And for whatever reason, we don't want to apply the laws of the land equally to sports. And
that is a fantastic point, because I get so sick of hearing it's a rule. It's like, if the NCAA came out tomorrow and said we are only allowed to have 3 black athletes on a team because we feel it's a rule, that of course would get struck down immediately because of laws. So it's like, don't try and do the rules of an independent system supersede laws that actually exist.
Right, and again, there is no separate world or ideal, and we can get into talking about the whole NCAA. But the point I get it is like we have a system in place right now that's I believe it is legally unsustainable. Right.
So by the way, I'm actually going to cut us off and say the following. This is perfect. I'm promising this is our next podcast, unless there's some major news. The trade deadline's passed. Kobe and Nash have already shut themselves down for the season. I'm not predicting it, but next podcast, next week we'll do this. And what I'll say is, in the comments, leave any questions you'd like Arturo and I to address. Understand we can email back and forth with Dave Barry. He's got a ton of insight.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, if we're gonna talk about the NCAA and we're gonna talk about college exploitation, we may want to just throw Dave an invite and see if he'll grace us with presence. Because I do think
we'll have to try and get you and Brian on earlier, because Dave is one of those normal people who goes home at the end of the night and doesn't stay up late podcasting. But in the comments section, leave us anything you'd like us to talk about the NCAA, or any extra points you have. Tweet at Arturo Galletti, at Nerd Numbers, or at Boxscore Brian. Also, we'll see if Patrick can be on, because it's always great when he's on, and I love seeing him get riled about this, and he has great opinions. So at NBA Geek, tweet at any of those if you've got questions. We can do that next week. And we're right at about an hour. So I'm going to say is, Arturo, you and I can stall for a bit. I'm going to let Brian have the last word, because we took Brian way over. So type something fun to end us out on, Brian. I'll let you talk until Brian leaves me the send-off, Arturo.
Well, I've got my mic hot actually right now, Dre, so thanks for watching, everyone. See you next week.